Hi, I'm Todd Jones, host of the podcast Press Box Access. Here's a clip from my interview with Marla Ridenour. Marla discusses how she was received by the Browns in 1981 when she became the first woman to cover that team. And when you get to Dayton in 81, they give you the beat to cover the Cleveland Browns. And no woman had ever covered the Browns on a daily basis like that. Were you a story because of that?
Well, my boss, the sports editor, Ralph Morrow, said, I don't want you in the headlines. I mean, basically he said, you're not going to be the story. I mean, he told me that, right off the bat. But there was when they first sent me to training camp, Sam Rutigliano was the coach. Training camp was at Kent State. We're in this little tiny office of his. I swear to God, it was almost like a military base. It was so Spartan. But he lays out, he tells me, Art Modell has given approval that you're going to be able to go in the locker room. But he laid out like, this is how, you're going to have to behave. He says, I expect you he says, I expect you to behave like I would expect my daughter to behave.
Oh, God.
He's like, lays out all this. And he also says, when you're after games, I want you to yell woman in the locker room.
He wanted you to yell that?
Yeah. So, well, to set the scene for this, at Cleveland Stadium, there was a little post-game thing where the coach talked. He kind of stood up on a little soapbox thing, and everybody scrummed around. And then you open the door to that office, and you go right into the locker. There was a door that right into the locker room. It also opened right by the shower. So, anyway, he said, as soon as you walk through that door, I want you to yell woman in the locker room. So, I did that faithfully because, that was the parameters. I was holding up my end of the bargain. So this will be, if I ever write a book, this will be the first chapter. Years later, I'm on Venice Beach with a couple fellow journalists. One of them was my best friend from college. We run into a former Browns defensive lineman, Elvis Franks. And I didn't know him that well, but the first words out of his mouth when I introduce him to my friends is, let me tell you a story about Marla.
Uh-oh.
I have no idea what he's going to say. And he proceeds to tell me that all the guys that had lockers right by that door banded together, and they were all as soon as they would hear me yell woman in the locker room, they would drop their towels at the same time.
Oh.
But after several weeks of doing this, they gave up because I never noticed. So I really developed in fact, I'm sure Gary Noon, he used to comment on this back in the day. It was like I could scan the locker room and look at people's heads and see who they were. You would look at guys from like the nose up just to make sure you weren't looking in places you weren't supposed to look. So I kind of figured out how to case the locker room to find my guys without, gawking, so to speak, I guess you would say.
Yeah, and I think at the time, it was we talked to Christine Brennan about this. It was, women were breaking down barriers that unfortunately were put up then, right? Think about this, how ridiculous it is. You're being told at one point early in your career you can't cover men's sports because you're a woman. It's absurd. So the idea that you can't go in the locker room, be professional, and do your job is it's not a barrier that we had to face. So
I always
admired that you were able to deal with that.
I will say this, even when I covered the Lady Cats, I did not go in the locker room because I didn't think it was fair to the men who covered the team that they couldn't go in. We did all our interviews out in the hallway because I thought it should be equal. And I appreciate the fact that, other times when, like, there were certain times when I couldn't go in to, the Bengals locker room when occasionally I filled in, the guys would do it out in the hallway for me too. It was kind of a pact we had.
Wasn't there a time where you were covering a Browns game in Cincinnati when they weren't going to let you, somebody wasn't going to let you in, but like a Browns equipment guy or somebody came?
That actually might have been the first season, my first season on the beat. I'm in the Browns locker room in Cincinnati and the guy, like one of the cops, security guards, whatever he was, like trying to throw me out because the Bengals wouldn't let, women in their side. So,
This is in Cincinnati, the game.
yeah, the game's in Cincinnati, but the guy's, like I said, ready to toss me, and then the equipment guy says she's with us. His
Oh,
name was
wow.
Chuck Cusick. I owe him forever. I mean, he really came to my defense because he saw what was happening. He's picking up the dirty towels and came right over there and said, "She's with us." So
Oh, well,
it
good
was
for
really
Chuck.
good. Yeah.
I mean, there were people, right, that did see the absurdity of it all and just tried to help. And because of people like yourself and other women sports writers, you did break down those walls and pave the way for so many female journalists today, which
I
is
will.
great.
I will say this though. Like I covered the Bengals, Super Bowl in '81, and they wouldn't let me in the locker room, so I was covering the opponent. So that led to some memorable moments for I think that was the Ice Bowl year too. So
So
um,
even the Super Bowl itself, they had different standards depending on which team it was. So you got to go in the 49ers locker room after they beat the Bengals, but the Bengals wouldn't let you in the locker room at the
right.
Super Bowl?
So I turns out and because I was working for an afternoon paper, some of the morning guys were still writing. So I'm kneeling at Montana's feet, like I could barely, practically touch him. I was so close, because there weren't that many. But no, the Bengals wouldn't let me in. Like I remember when they played the Chargers, I wasn't sure what the Chargers policy was, so I just ducked in there before anybody said anything. And Chuck Muncie gives me this look, like raised eyebrow look, but he didn't say anything or, holler for help or whatever.
Wow.
I just dashed in there. So, we were kind of on our own. It was not a mandated league thing at that point.
Wow.